afternoon. This is Ifan from the Strategic Day Trader, and this is your market wrap for June 3rd, 2019. Q's down 2.16%. We have about 3 minutes left, and the SPY down just 0.25%. So Q's showing a lot more weakness. Google and Facebook leading the way to the downside. See Google down 6.1 there, Facebook down 7.6. So a lot of these software names, these tech names, showing a lot of weakness throughout the day here, keeping the Qs weaker than the SPY. We did have a little bit of divergence at the open. SPY showing a little bit of strength, but downtrend still continues. That divergence doesn't really change anything as far as our market bias. So what we've been doing for the last couple of weeks is just following the downtrend. With each pivot, we use that as our line in the sand to where we will lose our bearish bias. Okay, and so far no pivot has been taken out. We're just following the trend down. Okay, now we are getting a little bit more extended away on the Qs without a good place or at least a nearby place to switch off of our bearish bias. So as it stands now, we're still going to go with Friday's high because that's where we have an actual pivot. Okay, so what I would like to see is over the next couple days, us get another pivot, some kind of sell set up here on the hourly. And then if we fail on that, then that will be our earliest sign that the selling is over. Okay, so far, as you saw in the entire month of May, that each week did not make a higher high than the previous. Okay, so if we get next week, this week closes, I'm not sure how it's going to close, where it's going to close, but if we get next week a break of this bar's high, then that could be our earliest sign that the selling is over. I think it's unlikely that we get back to last week's high, so that's why I'm not going over it. That could happen. If that happens, we'll definitely have picked it up early because the hourly trend will have broken first, right? So while we're getting some pretty interesting locations on the weekly, look at this monthly, right? Last time the new highs were led by a monthly pullback, right? We're getting it again here on the monthly, right? All those things will come to fruition and happen, but after it gives us an hourly transition. Okay, so that's why we are tuned into this hourly downtrend. So once this hourly downtrend breaks, right, we'll move off of the bearish bias. And then once those weekly, monthly, even the daily kicks in, right, we'll shift to the bullish bias and look for where to initiate our longs. Okay, so we're into the area of support, right? This could be the bottom, okay? It is not my goal here to figure out the bottom, right? My goal is to let it prove to me that the downtrend is over, right? And then we'll look for the continuation of an uptrend as our chance to shift to a bullish bias. Okay, so, you know, that's the thing I think that can be tricky. Not that it's the worst thing that you can do, but constantly trying to guess the bottom, constantly being wrong, I think can be pretty frustrating. Doesn't mean that you can't be right, and those times that you are right are enough to make up for the times that you are wrong. But the method that we're using, we're just following the trend, letting it prove to us when the downtrend is going to end. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Right now, we're sticking with Friday's high as our line in the sand, where we will shift to a neutral bias off of our bearish bias, but bearish bias remains going into tomorrow. All right. Now, just talking about today's trade. We had 2 calls on the CNC this morning. The first one came up right as we were trying to break the opening range. All right, so underneath the lows, you can see it triggered and did not work. Very quickly, stopped out there, came up very quick, and we were out. But this one, even though it didn't work initially, this was my favorite gap down. The favorite gap up was AMD. If you were in the room today, you got to do the open with me. So you got to hear me go over every single gap, tell you what the favorites were. I only had one favorite long and one favorite short. The favorite long was AMD at the open. I like that showing relative strength. And I did give you an idea over the highs. I think just came up right after the CNC, and I just didn't get a chance to catch it. But I'm glad we re-entered the CNC. So the CNC, we started off with a losing play as it took out the highs there, but saw that there really was no follow through to that. We were not part of this, but we saw that it put in this retracement here and then was able to give you the call. This time, I think more people were actually playing this one because you had more time to get in it. So under 53.20 with a stop at 53.65. Okay, I'll show you the 2-minute because I did think that was the most cleanest and prettiest of the patterns. So you establish the new low there, you get a retracement, and then you break back down. So we got that. It still kind of wrestled with us a little bit, and then the targets were going to be new lows, and we got them in here. We're able to trail half, trailed another quarter in here, and then we took the final piece there around, I think the last piece trailed out around 52.15. Okay, so not too bad. Decided not to hold a runner because we were all the way down here. Our stop was still up here. I hadn't made any changes to the stop. I think you could have tried to trail this down, but we were already well on our way with no good place to trail. So you could have tried to hold for longer. You can see I definitely didn't get the bottom. Ended up going all the way to 51.11. We got out at 52.15. Wouldn't have been an easy pullback to live through, right? But still pretty decent play. Glad that this CNC worked. And that's just going to happen sometimes. I think the difference in time between the first entry and the next one is like 8 minutes, something like that. First entry, yeah, closer maybe 10 minutes, so, it's something that I knew was my favorite gap down and really wanted to focus on this. So it was the kind of thing that even though it didn't work initially, right, got back in it and more than made up for that loss. And this was, I thought, pretty solid play, just standard high quality pro gap here. We went over the gap ranking here, right? If it's against the short-term trend, right, that gets a point. If it's clearing support, which it was, that gets a point. There was more support below, so that was maybe the only criteria there that you could make a case against. Would have preferred to see a gap under 45.40, then it'd really be clearing any immediate support, right? But ended up gapping underneath this pivot here. I still like it. We know that the gap wasn't caused by the market because it was caused by Humana no longer purchasing CNC. So we know that it had its own news. We know that it had its own kind of catalyst. You can see by the volume here too that it was definitely on its own page, right? And then wasn't gapping excessively and wasn't gapping in the direction of the long-term trend, which I actually really liked this long-term trend gapping against the weekly here, right? Triggering a sell setup. So this was a very high quality gap, and that's why on something like this, willing to give it 2 shots to prove to me whether it's going to work or not, or whether or not, there are trapped longs in here. And that's what I expect. This has been grinding higher. 20 MA has been moving up too. So there's been net buying. And this is surprising some of those buyers and forcing them to have to get out and also triggering a weekly sell setup. So that was it for me on the CNC today. We kind of made the morning really quickly there. Was done with it after the first hour or so. And like I said, you could have held on to it all the way until lunch. And then I did give an idea if you wanted to re-enter to play this breakdown. I let that one go, but market sure helped as well. So nice follow through there on the CNC. Maybe you caught the AMD this morning. We only had one favorite long, and that was the AMD this morning. So, I thought it was a pretty just kind of standard day, business as usual, and especially with what we've gotten for the last couple weeks, pretty standard. Now, I'd say the only thing different about today that we haven't seen as of late is this extension down. Like I said, I'd like to see a rally and then put in the sell setup, and then if that sell setup the next move lower cannot follow through, then we can shift to a bullish bias. So it could be coming in the next couple days where we lose our bearish bias. But we'll see. We'll see. If it gives us another pivot and continues just like it has been, we will stay bearish. Okay, so not too complicated. And that's the way that we've been keeping it. I know it got a little bit sloppier there in the beginning of May, and I was thinking that, you know, we did get a failed sell setup there, and then we got a failed buy setup, and I thought we were going to get pretty sloppy, but, you know, if we're following the trend, we knew that this was a short opportunity, right? And we've been sticking with it ever since, okay? So hope you did well today. If not, we'll be back at it tomorrow, and we'll see what the market brings, all right? Have a good evening.